Welcome to the CyberSangha podcast. CyberSangha is a program of free live broadcasts, launched in 2009 by renowned teacher and author Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Join us as we draw on ancient Tibetan wisdom to discover how to connect with our best self and live to our highest potential. In the following conversation, the cycle of light and dark, a scientific and spiritual exploration of sleep, Part 2, happened on May 29th, 2024 as a science and spirituality dialogue with Dr. Ed O'Malley and Geshe Tenzin Wangyal. This was part of a year-long series for 2024. This content is for informational purposes only. Listeners should consult medical professionals for any physical or mental health concerns. Please use headphones and do not meditate while driving or operating machinery.
Welcome, everybody. Today, I'm very honored and very happy to have Ed O'Malley. So I wanted to do a short introduction, and then our speaker will begin with some slideshow. And then afterward, I'll have some questions, and then we will also have some conversations. So Ed is an integrative sleep specialist trained at Cornell University Graduate School of Medicine Science and NYU Sleep Disorder Center in New York. For 12 years, he served as a director of the Norwalk Hospital, teaching hospital of Yale University Sleep Disorder Center, training resident physicians in sleep medicine and creating the first insomnia center in the region. He holds advanced certification in biofeedback and certified nature awareness trainer. Takes a broad approach of sleep and wellness. So also we're very happy that in October we were also together, and Ed has shown one of the speakers there, and it was wonderful opportunity for all of us to learn from him. So I am very excited today here. This will not be clearly the last one. This will be a continuation of many more conversations. So Ed, please welcome.
Thank you, Rinpoche. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and dialogue about sleep and circadian rhythms, always near and dear to my heart, because it's part of the natural world, and I really marry the two together. We can't have one without the other. And as we discovered at Serenity Ridge when we did the inaugural spring health retreat, which was just remarkable to be out in nature, to have these talks, and to really put it into practice right then and there. So I will start with actually an image from my presentation there. And with the title of today's being the cycles of light and dark. Let me go back to that really quickly. This was the solar eclipse that we all had recently, and it was such a great image of light and dark that it's a great way to start off, because we all noticed quite precipitously the change when that happens, but so does the entire natural world that experiences this. The animals and the birds all do get a little surprised about what's going on. So to kick this off, I'd like to talk about the separate but interactive drives that underlie our sleep and wake states in humans, but also extended to all mammals' sleep, and they all respond to light, and we are mammals at heart as well. I'll talk a little bit about how sleep-wake states respond to light, how we respond to light when awake and also while asleep, how our master circadian clock primes all the others in the body, and I'll talk about the rhythms and the clocks in every cell in our body, every organ system, and finally finish on the importance of natural light for health and well-being. So to start, this is a graphic I like to use. It kind of combines all the major impacts on our ability to be asleep or to be awake at any time. Those of you who saw Danny Lewin's excellent presentation a month ago, opening us up to the field of sleep and the science of sleep, presented something similar just so we orient you to the role of light in our ability to be awake or asleep. Along the bottom here is time of day. So this is morning, afternoon, evening, and night. And then that's followed by another morning, afternoon, evening, and night. So these are rhythms that run through our days. And on this side, we're looking at sleep pressure at the top here. And we call this the homeostatic drive to sleep. And it simply means that the more we're awake, the more likely we're going to sleep. And then we'll look at how we are awake or asleep during the day. And then finally, what is this circadian drive? What is this wake? What is this alerting stuff that goes on? So we start with when we get up in the morning, our brains turn on, or we wake up, we start thinking, cognating, we plan, we use our brains, we use our minds. And as a byproduct of that, one of the side products is something that creates sleepiness, that the longer we're awake and using our minds, the greater it builds up during the day. And the only thing that clears that is the physiologic state of sleep. And then we get up the next day and it all begins over again. Now, what's important about what's building up during the day is this byproduct of the action of our brain cells, and that is adenosine. And adenosine, you may not know by that name, but you may know it by the effects of its antagonist, which is caffeine. So we know that caffeine blocks adenosine. It blocks that stuff that makes us sleepy. And so we don't want to have that too late. And you understand why some of those recommendations are made. But essentially, adenosine's building up, creating sleepiness. And a couple of other not so nice players are also byproducts of thinking. Beta amyloid protein and tau protein. And these really are, they've been found to have a major role in Alzheimer's disease. So we're beginning to see some associations there. And if you didn't need another reason to be getting your sleep at night, that might be one of them. But we don't feel this incremental increase in sleepiness during the day. And that's because of this other major player here, the alerting pressure, the wake pressure, or circadian drive. Okay. Now this turns on in the morning too, and it's turned on by light, which is what we're all here for today. And we're going to talk a lot more about that. But essentially it turns on and it alerts the brain. So it offsets this sleepiness that builds up during the day. And we feel more like awake. We're pretty sharp. We're pretty sharp now, maybe a little bit later, a couple hours later in the afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. We have a dip in our alerting mechanism, and we feel this drop in our energy about 8 hours after arising in the morning. But then it kicks into overdrive, and we have a burst of this activity to sort of hold off that sleepiness, allow us to be alert in the evening, and then hopefully it drops off and we get to sleep, and then the same process builds up again the next day. I want to throw in this third process because it's also a pressure, particularly in modern Western society, and now it's becoming more global society where we're all dealing with probably more than we want to be dealing with during the day. Lots of activities, lots of overwhelmed, so many things going on. And so I call this stress pressure. And I deal a lot with insomnia because that's what I've been focused on the last probably 20, 30 years or so. And we neglect this. We neglect to deal with the stresses of the day. And one of the best ways of dealing with the stresses of the day is to get out in nature. So it all connects together. And we're going to talk about that as we go forward. So all animals sleep, right? We know that all animals sleep. Many of them are nocturnal and sleep during the day, and then they're up at night. They do their hunting at night, okay? But they respond to light and dark, and they need to sleep. Even the tiniest critters that are millions and millions of years old use this. So the zooplankton in the ocean actually has melatonin as well and responds to light and dark just like we do, except they come up at night when they need a lot of activity, so their brains know it's nighttime. They can come up to the surface and feed at the surface when all of their predators, the whales, are sleeping at night. So the whales are mammals, they sleep at night. The zooplankton gets their melatonin. Melatonin tells them it's night, so they actually come up and they feed, and then they go down when the melatonin turns off. In the daytime, they drop deep into the ocean out of the way of their predators. So this is virtually ubiquitous throughout the natural world. We have our own way of responding to light in the brain, and it starts with the eyes, right? The eyes are what take in the light information from our surrounding world. And so the way that works is we know that in the back of the eyes are the retinas. And our retina is the business end of the eye, right? That's where all the information from the outside world comes in so we can see visual information, color, shape, size, movement. All of that takes place back here in the retina. But in addition, there's a subset of cells that contain melanopsin. And melanopsin responds to the presence or absence of light. And that's where this connection is made. So when light is present, the cells in the back of the eye, their melanopsin activates. They take that information back to the master biological clock here in the hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus controls most of our physiologic drives like hunger, satiety, body temperature, when things turn on and off, but mainly the master biological clock is the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This records that presence of light. And we call it the SCN for short. It takes that information back deeper into the brain to the pineal gland. And the pineal gland is the home of melatonin production. So now you can see this connection from the outside light comes all the way through. And when light is present, melatonin is told to shut down. That's how our brains know it's morning. But also, there's an internal rhythm that is then turned on when melatonin shuts down. There's a timer that comes back on approximately 14 hours, a couple hours right before bedtime. It comes back on the next night. So all of us who are awake today had our melatonin rhythm set this morning when we were first exposed to light, and that'll happen again tomorrow morning when we get up. But if we have light after hours, you can see some of the issues, right? We look at our devices, we have screens we're staring at, and those screens are made really illuminant by the presence of the blue light in the spectrum of the light that we're seeing. So that helps our brain stay awake. It keeps our devices bright so we can see, but we don't want that after hours. Okay. Now, these studies were done in humans, and so what happens is when you take people and you remove all of the time cues, which are the lights, and we have developed some other cues as well. Light is the strongest one, but also the smell of food, the smell of coffee in the morning. Lots of things can really turn our brains on just to give us some hint that it's daytime, right? We love that smell of coffee in the morning. Well, when we take away all those cues, for instance, in the early days, they did these experiments in the caves. So Rinpoche, the caves weren't just used for meditation, at least over here. They were used for cutting off all these outdoor cues. So there were no cues. Didn't know what time of day or night it was. There was plenty of food stored. There was a nice mat for these subjects to sleep in. And today we do these in time-protected labs and sleep labs where they do this work. But essentially, they take out these cues. And when they do, So here in the light color is really sleep time, and here in dark is activity, these activity monitors. And you can see, actually, let me reverse that. This is daylight, this is dark. What happens is this is when somebody's awake. These are individual days. And what you can see is first, we're very regular. Okay, they're sleeping at night and they're awake in the daytime, sleeping at night, awake in the daytime. As soon as you take the cues away, you begin to notice everything begins to drift a little bit later, a little bit later, a little bit later. And essentially what happens is you go around the clock and you start sleeping around the clock. So our internal clock is roughly 24 hours, but it's a little bit longer, which allows us to adapt to seasonal changes as the sun moves, well, really as the earth turns and gets closer and closer to the sun and moves around day in and day out. We then have the cues to be able to pull us back in. And this is shown very clearly by eventually at day 84, 85, 83, they were brought back into regular light conditions, regular time cues. And you can see their days and nights get locked back in again. And they're back into daylight. So that internal rhythm is present, but the outside light is what governs it, is what regulates it, is what it responds to. Okay, that's a long way to show that. And another way we may have all experienced this is if we fly across time zones. And I know, Rinpoche, when you flew east, we always find it's harder to fly east than it is to go west. And the reason is when we fly west, we can force ourselves to stay up later, right? We can go out we can get to California in where it's much earlier, 3 hours earlier than the West Coast, and get outside in there, either the end of their daylight, we meet with friends, we can have conversation, we have dinner, and so we can force ourselves to stay awake. And then eventually, if we're there for 3 or 4 days, we adapt, and our circadian clock now adapts to California time. And then we fly back to New York. And when we come back to New York time, the problem is when we want to go to sleep on New York time, our rhythm has shifted later. Our melatonin wants to come on for California time, but here we are back in New York and we want to go to sleep. And so we may have difficulty. And the same when you fly to Europe from the West Coast or the East Coast. From the West Coast, it's even more difficult. Lots of time zones. So that's problematic. But we could also have social jet lag, okay? And that's what happens when we change our clocks. Okay, when we have daylight savings time, which can be real problematic. And the way they look at this, the transportation department did a lot of studies looking at traffic fatalities and what they call eccentric time localities. And that is at one extreme or the other of their particular time zone. So the eccentric time zones are in blue here, and that's where the clock time differs from where the sun tells you it's midday the most in any particular time zone. So in these different time zones across the states, these are like the extremes of the time zones. And what happens is if you look within a time zone and you compare traffic accidents on one side of the time zone with the other, you find 20% more, 21, 22% more motor vehicle crashes that occur in these eccentric time zones, which really speak to we don't want a time zone that shifts us out of alignment with solar time or with nature time or with sun time. And that's what daylight savings time does. And so that's one of the issues we have to deal with. And here's another example of that. When we're in standard time, you can see this is where the sun would be in most of these time zones. And what happens when we go to daylight savings time, it's like we're moving a full time zone away from where we were in the natural time, and if we allow natural time to continue throughout the year. So we're much closer to where the sun tells us it's overhead light. And I'll get into in a few moments how important that overhead sunlight is, and having sunlight be where it naturally is for all of our organ systems. And so we create social jet lag by going to daylight savings time, and we certainly don't want to make that permanent, because that just keeps us further out of alignment. Permanent daylight savings time will now make half or a good third, several, the Dakotas, Michigan, some of these states will be in complete darkness the entire winter. The sun doesn't even rise here in Michigan until 10 a.m. if we keep permanent daylight savings time. And the places where they tried it, even in Russia, they tried it for, I think, 3 years. And it was so terrible. There was so much increase in illness, they ended up going back. We tried it for a year back in 74, and there were just so many issues with that, particularly this darkness all winter long, that people would arise in the dark, that it was just it was untenable, really. So that's how important this is. And melatonin basically follows and gives us a biological night that is essentially associated with our ability to be in the sunlight, right? So I talked about how sun regulates melatonin on and off, right? It turns it off in the morning and sets the clock for it to come on later at night. So normally, here's where the rhythm would be. If we get light earlier in the daytime, or if we get light earlier in the daytime, we can shift our melatonin rhythm earlier, right? Because we're telling, if we get up at 5 in the morning and somehow, it's really bright out, or we have ourselves we use a light box, or we get something that gives us strong light in the morning, we can pull our rhythms back. And this is what happens in part due to aging. In aging, our clock begins to move back a little bit. In adolescence, it actually gets delayed. So if we have light exposure in the evening, it moves our rhythm. And so our bedtime, our melatonin coming on, telling us it's bedtime, shifts later. And we call that a delayed sleep phase syndrome, or just a delay of our clock, of our internal clock. So when we get light at night, when we're supposed to be having melatonin come on, it gets delayed, and so it's not going to come on later. It's harder to fall asleep if we get this light after sunset. These rhythms have differing components in the body. So this is body temperature. And so what happens is body temperature begins to drop off once the evening takes place, but a little bit before our melatonin comes on, and then it comes back up as our melatonin is coming back down. So it's in the opposite relationship to our melatonin, but it flows nicely with our wakefulness. So our body temperature is up when we're awake, and then it drops off as we sleep, and then it comes back on during the day. So we have these different rhythms. These are the big 24-hour rhythms. But as mentioned, in the adolescents, they have one of those built-in delays. So what happens with adolescents, so here's the adult brain. We get up in the morning at 6, 7 o'clock, light comes on, melatonin goes off, and then it turns back on at about 8 or 9 o'clock. We get prepared for bed. We're in bed by 9. The adolescents, unfortunately, as from early puberty to late puberty, this delays more and more to where their melatonin begins coming on much later, up to a couple hours later. And then it turns off much later. So in the morning, they're not ready to get up at 6 or 7 like they're being forced to go to school. So you can see that can create quite the issue. Their brains are really, in a sense, in the middle of their sleep night. It's like us getting up at 4. They're getting up at 7. And so eventually theirs turns off, but not until later in the evening on average. And then you couple that with all the devices, right? All the e-media that they're exposed to, all the social media at night, and it becomes harder for those poor teens to get any sleep at all. So we can help them by setting limits on, that exposure, or at least set the devices, our good old phones, set our smartphones to have a bedtime phase. It pulls out the blue lights if you set it from sunrise to sunset. So there's less of that if you're going to be on your devices at night. Having dinner earlier, you'll see, because when we eat can also help signal what we need to do for our rhythms. So while we have a master biological clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, it is what regulates all of our different rhythms. So all of our organ systems have their own internal rhythms. They have their own genes that turn on. And I know Danny mentioned in the last talk that the 2017 Nobel Prize in Physiology went to the discoverers of these clock genes. They discovered them in Drosophila, the fruit flies, and in the animal work they did. But essentially, they found these same genes. They're in every creature on the planet. There are more or less of them. We have more. We have about 12 to 24 clock genes, but they're in every organ system of the body. They're in every cell of the body. And what pulls them all into some kind of alignment is our SCN. And our SCN is what keeps us in tune with natural light. And so even our skin cells have a rhythm of when they get replaced and when they get sloughed off and when they come back. But also the pancreas, when does it release insulin? So when do we have our meals? And this may speak a lot to the importance of why breakfast is such an important meal, because when we get up in the morning, once the clock tells the rest of the body it's morning, food will lock that in. And it will also turn on when to release insulin, when to start using the glucose that it's expecting, how to deal with that. We don't want that turning on late at night, right before we go to bed, because it's not going to be able to continue without the signal from the master clock. We have not done ourselves any favor by, Thomas Edison was a great inventor, but, the electric light really, it's served technology and it's advanced us in a lot of ways, but it's also now becoming a real issue. So light pollution has become an issue for all of us. What happens with electric lights is that if you look at the amount of nighttime radiance we're beginning to get, the more outdoor light, the more any kind of light exposure we get, the later bedtime becomes. And this is what's happening to us as humans. The more light we get exposed to at night, the more likely we're going to go to bed later, the more likely we're going to wake up later, and the more likely we're going to reduce our amount of sleep. So when there's a lot of light, we're getting very little sleep. When we have less light exposure, we're getting to the sweet spot of that 7 to 8 hours, and maybe even up to 9 for some of us. So artificial light, the amount of artificial light exposure really regulates, and these are done in population studies. So where we, like in New York City, for instance, the city that never sleeps, it's true. It's true. They sleep the least of most cities. Most cities actually sleep less than anyone out in the country. So the rural versus the urban, it's a big deal. The rural people sleep a little more. And this was done in an elegant study by a colleague of mine, Ken Wright Jr., out of Colorado. He did a very simple experiment in some ways to demonstrate this. But what he did that made it more complex with his and with all of his colleagues, of course, is to look at the difference between electrical lighting, meaning what we get exposed to indoors. So we have light in the morning, we have light even at night, we have light during our daytime, which is much less intense than the light we get outside. This is natural light in the darker black here. And then we're getting more electrical light after sunset, okay, in our evenings. So this is what our days really look like, our exposure to light, if we're not getting outdoors much. And if you look at the spectrum of light, the different wavelengths of light included in electrical lighting, you can see they're green and blue. There's lots of light, and especially after sunset, this kind of light that we get later, there's a lot of blue light in it. And unfortunately, that's going to really come back to haunt us, right? When you look at natural light, you can see that it drops quickly off. The blue part goes right off. And if you have a campfire here, you get some nice red light, but there's hardly any light for the nighttime hours. And so what they did, this is the elegant part of this experiment, is they took a bunch of people who thought they were pretty much night owls, right? They're up late at night, they're getting all this light after sunset, and they're basically up midnight, 1 a.m., and they thought of themselves as night owls. And what he did was he took them out camping for a weekend. They all went out camping. They were all instrumented with all these devices that measured their light exposure, their sleep-wake activity. And what he found was this is their data when they were out in the sunset, when they were out having a campfire. They basically shifted their clock time from being up all sorts of hours to dropping to sleep.
Can you interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
So the one you have a natural light which shows completely blue up all the way blue down in the evening, still some kind of blue. But I also heard somewhere that in the evening when the sun set, during the warm light, the red light, sunset light, is somehow it supports the melatonin. Instead of morning light, the blue light, it kind of suppresses it. So it's like a evening sunset, red helps, morning sunrise, blue light.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's very true. This is just done in the woods where they were camping, and so there wasn't a lot of sunset light they saw. So this is the light basically in the woods where they were camping out. But essentially, that's true. And I actually have a little more data to show on that, Rinpoche, that sunset light has more of the oranges and reds in it, and in part because of the particulate matter in the sky. Once we've been up all day, there's just, a lot of material happens to get into the atmosphere, and that blocks the shorter wavelength blue lights, so that mostly red and orange light is there, and that does help the brain. I'm gonna talk more about that, but you're absolutely right. Not only that, but even in the daytime, getting daylight, there's recent data that's beginning to suggest that the amount of daylight, natural light we're getting exposed to outside strengthens our rhythm, strengthens our internal rhythm, so that it's less susceptible to the indoor light we get when we come indoors, if we're getting a lot of outdoor light. So however we cut it, getting out in nature is better for us than staying indoors. And this kind of speaks to that a little bit too. So we're trying to bring a little bit of that outdoors, indoors now, and looking at the effect of red light. So there are these devices that are coming out now that actually they're low lux. Lux is the intensity of light, right? Lux comes from, actually the original definition of lux was the amount of light a candle would shed 1 foot away. That would be 1 lux. And so, candlelight, firelight, campfires, and that kind of thing, very low lux light. And so you can get a red light both in that red spectrum and not too intense, under 50 lux, And if you spread that light and you show that light, you find that red light actually can support increasing the amount of melatonin. Red light actually increases melatonin. And this might be part of that mechanism by which getting exposed to daylight and getting exposed to sunset, that red-orange sunset, actually supports our melatonin system and increases it. And this was compared with placebo, which showed no significant difference. And if you ask people to rate their sleep, the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index is fairly common used in the field. You get disorders after a certain level, generally around 5. Pittsburgh index of 5 or greater usually indicates some type of poor sleep. You can see that when they had red light treatment, their Pittsburgh quality sleep index dropped low. So it really shows both in subjective experience of your sleep is improved, and we think it's due to melatonin because that responds nicely to red light. And if you want any better reason to get outside and get in light and get your sleep, but also to get up every day and get some sleep or some light exposure first thing in the morning. These are recent data that came out from the UK health systems. You know, they have their national health system, which everybody buys into, and all their data. They looked at this for 65,000 people. They looked at them over 8 years, and what they did was they gave them activity recorders, not unlike the devices we wear, and they looked at their ability to, their regularity, meaning they were looking at, were they getting up roughly the same time every day and going to bed roughly the same time every night. So in this group, the green and the blues up here, these guys are going to bed fairly close to the same time every day and every night. In this group, they're looking at total amount of sleep. And so sleep is still very important. The amount of sleep you get is still very important because what they're looking at over time in these two green groups up here, green-blue groups up here, would be those with the longest lifespans. So out 8 years, how many people are still surviving? They're looking at longevity. And certainly when you're sleeping your 7 to 8, 9 hours, you're going to have a much better chance of being still alive out at 8 years. But those who, don't sleep well, they're not going to do as well as the people who are sleeping well. But there's a dramatically different and worse case scenario for those who aren't sleeping their amount, but also sleeping irregularly, which is like getting up on the weekends 2 hours later, or, going to bed 2 hours later at this night, getting up earlier one day, going to bed, not respecting that rhythm, that constancy. So all of our rhythms, all of our organs depend on a regular input. And when we disturb that, and we've all had this experience, right? If we've been up too late one night, or we've gone out, on the weekend, celebrating a party, good reasons, bad reasons, whatever. We do these things from time to time. We know that we feel a bit off the next day. We don't feel hungry at the right time. We don't feel like we've slept well the right time. So regularity is now even seen as more important than sleep duration. I never thought I'd see the day that anything would be more important than getting enough sleep. But while that's still important, regularity is even more important. That's a big one. That's new data, and we're going to hear a lot more about that. So that's why strong recommendations for everyone. Outdoor light exposure first thing in the morning. I like to say dog owners rule because Fido's got to get out and do his business first thing in the morning, right? But if you're not a dog owner or you're not the dog walker, take that first cup of tea or coffee and step out on the back porch. Step outside 5 minutes of strong light exposure will be a strong signal for your melatonin rhythm. It tells your brain unequivocally, this is morning, we're awake, let's shut the melatonin down so it comes back on 14, 15, 16 hours later, okay? And then because of, not just because of, and our meditation master will tell us more about this, but not just because of the meditations we do during the day, but we want to do them outdoors. We want to do all of this outdoors that we can during the day, because the more light we get outdoors, the stronger our circadian rhythm will be, the more regularity, and the more our internal systems will work really well. And then finally, outdoor light exposure last thing in the evening, as Rinpoche mentioned earlier, right? That sunset light, the oranges and all that information, we are information pack rats. We don't realize our brains are. They take that information in and it helps set the system. We evolved in daylight and dark light. We evolved in the outdoors. So of course, all of our systems are intimately involved and depend on regularity from the natural world. And I want to add, here's the great place to say that no bright or blue light exposure after sunset, right? We try to reduce that as best we can. Practicalities, sometimes we have to work, sometimes we have to be on our devices. Those of you who are in the late parts of the world right now, where it is dark, you're probably looking at your screen if you're seeing this live. But I would advise getting a hold of some blue blocker sunglasses, the amber colored ones, the orange ones, okay? Because they're going to knock out 90, 95, 100% of your blue light exposure from any screens you have. These glasses are pretty good too. I have some coating on mine that knock down about 40, 45% of the blue light. So they help our eyes deal with the constant screen exposure we have during the day, but they're not going to be useful for after sunset. You really need the amber ones. Oh, that's right. We have our meditation and sleep expert. Rinpoche has put out ways to support your sleep health. I agree with every single one of them. This will be in the recorded session. So instead of having me to talk about it, and Danny talked about it last part one of this series. So they're all right here for you. I won't take much time to speak about them right now. Also from our resident sleep expert, no more screens. Let's make our bedrooms a sacred place to be. We don't want to bring light into the bedrooms unless it's candlelight, okay? Candlelight, we're good with, or those little red light devices we now have. And I'm just going to skip through these couple because I've talked long enough and I'd like to have some questions and dialogue. But now when I include my live well to sleep well to be well, I put a campfire in there too, because we get out in nature, we won't have to worry about having sleep issues. Nature will definitely wake us up and put us to sleep. And I think I'll end there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I don't know. I mean, while you're speaking, I have many questions. Once you finish, kind of my mind is a little bit empty. But what I will start is just maybe first more personal advice, or what I've been thinking sometime. When you wake up in the morning, which I get up quite early, around 5:30, 6, but usually I don't go out about hour, because now here in Europe right now it's kind of sunrise quite early. So would you suggest that as soon as the light comes out, is it better to go out the hours, to build up, to stop the melatonin and build up the wakeful pressure, prepare for the night to sleep? So more hours, 15, 16 hours, 17 hours, is it better, or go out later, get exposure to the sun later is okay?
Well, later is okay to get some more light. But if you want your brain to be ready for sleep when it's your sleep time where you are now with that early sunlight in the morning, then I would still say first thing in the morning. Get out there, get that sun.
16 hours, you would say something?
Yeah. Well, so melatonin comes on roughly an hour or two before our typical bedtime if we've got up at a certain time. And let's say we need about 8 hours a night on average, okay? So 16 hours later is when it's going to come on, an hour or two before that. So 14, 15 hours later. Yeah. So.
Okay, the other question I heard that somewhere it was something interesting. What I heard is that if you get up early, get enough. You were talking earlier about 10-minute, 15-minute with a cup of coffee outside the sun. I usually try to get at least couple of hours of the sun. Make sure that even being out. So somewhere I heard that if you get enough of morning blue light sun, so then it's not justifying that I would like to use the screen in the evening, but I heard that if you get enough hours, then the blue light in the evening will not affect as much. Is it true?
That is true. That is absolutely true. And that's what some of the latest research coming out is supporting. But it's not necessarily only that morning light. So it's like the way to think about the morning light is that first batch of morning sunlight, that first blast of morning sunlight is like a signal to the brain for the melatonin rhythm. The rest of the light you get, whether it's morning, afternoon, and before sunset, bright light, around midday, somewhere before and somewhere after, that helps steel your system against having indoor light weaken your melatonin rhythm.
Yeah, so generally, it seems like average 90% of the time, if people are indoor, so only 10% outside. Some people even less.
Yeah. And that's really problematic for a number of reasons. We have a lot of chronic conditions, particularly in the West, where, we're workaday people, we're indoors, we maybe have a window. A lot of places don't have windows. Even bright windows are better than no windows, but get outside, get outside. If you're going to have lunch, get outside, take your lunch outside, make sure, it serves so many purposes. It gives that, strong signal to the brain. It helps the brain resist the indoor light you're going to go back into, but it also helps the rest of your system to wind down, to interrupt the day, to the stress that's building up. You go out, you take a little stroll in the park, 10, 15 minutes, and come back in. That will help you settle back down. And then you'll be more prepared for the afternoon work you need to do. And then again, at the end of work, get back outside, take a stroll before you go into the house at home, go home, bring the kids out, play in the yard for a little while, get some of that daylight, especially at least in the warmer seasons when we have more light. Let's take advantage of it. And, Rinpoche, also the data is such that when you really look at this closely, the light exposure we get in the summer is greater, and the light exposure we get in the winter is less just because of, nature. We sleep less in the summer and more in the winter. It's measurable significantly, half an hour in some places.
You're saying that is because of the amount of sun exposure during the summer?
Yep.
What about, people are also using the white light, about 10,000 lux, maybe sometime sun is not out there, so you just turn on the light indoor and get exposed to that just to wake up, signal to match the clock.
Yeah. Now I don't have any data to support this, but here's my feeling about that. Yes, if you can't get outdoors, get that kind of light. But in the wintertime, there are people with seasonal affective disorder, SAD, where they just need more light than the rest of us. Absolutely. Use one of those 10,000 lux boxes or sunlight alarm clocks also to help you get up in the morning in the wintertime. But don't overdo it. The wintertime, at least for the majority of people, is a quieter, a going inside time. It's when we sleep more, we're less active, so if we honor those natural rhythms, we can't go wrong, the way I look.
So do you know this Sachin Panda who
Yes.
who did the circadian rhythm and health research, and talking about how much our health is affected by circadian rhythm. So just
Yeah. He wrote a great book. I actually listened to an audiobook, The Circadian Code. He's done a lot of really powerful research. A couple things I might take a little issue with, like, saying that, for our adolescents, all we have to do is prepare dinner earlier and don't give them a smartphone and they'll be just fine. There's still some shifting rhythm.
Something that he was talking about. I thought, I usually get my morning sun and exercise in the morning, but he was talking about, special conditions, people might be better in the afternoon. And I often heard that don't do too much exercise before you go to bed, but he was suggesting a little bit afternoon or even evening. I was surprised, kind of contradicts.
Yeah. Some of these things are a little, you have to, first of all, everyone is unique. And so when I say, we give all these recommendations out, you need to see what works for you, because for some people, exercising late doesn't seem to impact their sleep. That's fine. Some people who drink coffee at night, they're always going to have a problem. Even though they think they fall right asleep, that sleep is terrible compared to when they don't have the caffeine. So some things are cut and dried, but other things you might need to play with a little bit and see. The first thing is, if you only have time to exercise in the evening, we'll do some, but be mindful of how intense it is and what it's going to do for you. Light yoga, that kind of thing should be fine. I love what he says about the time-restricted eating. I think that's getting more and more playtime, and I think it's going to be really 8-hour eating windows, 10-hour eating windows. Our clocks turn on, our insulin. We don't want that stuff turning on at night when we're trying to sleep.
Basically, it seems like a very clear that our body, our organs need a break, like our mind needs a break. So everybody and everything needs a break. So when you are eating 3 meals a day, snack in between, the moment you open your eye, your mouth is open, you're eating all the time, then that's not going to give a break to anybody, right? So right. That I think clearly seems like a very, very important. But again, some people, I heard a friend of mine, he's sleep well. So for me, it's the opposite. I can feel the differences,
Yeah. Well, for some people too, if you eat, at dinner at 5 and you don't go to bed till 12, you might need some more nutrient to carry you through the night. So again, you try what works for you.
Another question is that, the solar or the light affecting the master clock and giving signal to the brain, basically. And the food, it seems like it's giving a signal to the circadian rhythm of all the rest of the organ, like an organ. So somehow food is to all our organ, and then the light is directly connected to the brain. Is it okay statement to say like that? Or it's primarily like that?
Yeah, it is primarily like that. If you look at it, every cell has clock genes that turn on or off at different times during the day. So that means every organ system, they kind of all turn on together. The pancreas turns on all together, the liver turns on all together, but they have to also recognize their rhythm and how they're connected together. So when the pancreas turns on and sends insulin out so we can start putting some of the stuff away, then the liver has to be ready to then take the fats later on in order to store the fats. And so they all connect in some way. And they all, even though they have different rhythms, they're all set to the SCN saying, this is daytime. You guys start your, whatever you do in the daytime, you start.
But I was saying that in the morning, you should not eat at least eat after 1 hour, because the organs are not fully ready to work, something like that.
Well, I know Sachin Panda talks about this, and I don't know the data that strongly to say whether. To me, I got the sense that once you're fully awakened in the morning and you get that strong light, then your body is ready to be active. And if your body is ready to be active, it's going to need fuel to be active. Yeah. And so probably within that hour at least, I wouldn't wait any more than an hour, but I think it is all timed, especially if you meet that sleep regularity where you're getting up the same time, going to bed every day. When you get up in the morning, I would say your belly's ready for food probably within 15 to 20 minutes. It's like, okay, give me some food. Maybe I need to do a little exercise first. You might want to do that first, depending on how intense your exercise is. If you're doing 150 prostrations, you might not want to eat right before that. You might want to do that first. But, it depends.
Sure. So this is a little bit more complicated question. This question about earlier, you talked about in the Tibet, people do dark retreat. So like going 49 days, I know a friend of mine, he went for 100 days. Unfortunately, I did not know anything about circadian rhythm or even pay attention to then. It was such a long time ago. But I heard that, in some research, as you've shown, some research is done going to the cave. So somehow, just a question about the time was getting longer or shorter in the dark. I don't remember.
Okay, so in the dark, what happens is you start going to bed a little bit later and you get up a little bit later. You go to bed a little bit later, you get up a little bit later, and that keeps moving.
So are you losing time or gaining time?
No. Your
internal time.
It's still a 24-hour rhythm. It's just that now it's shifted later. So if you had a clock in there, you'd see by looking at the clock, instead of you going to bed at your regular 10 o'clock, the first night without cues, you go to bed at 10:05, 10:10. Next night, maybe 10:20, 10:30. Next night, maybe 11:30 or 11, then 11:30. And each day you're getting up comparably a little bit later. So you're not really losing time per se, you're just shifting it.
So what about if somebody, nobody will do that, but if somebody stayed a whole year like that, what happens to their health? Or what happened to the internal clock, master clock?
The data I showed you was from 80 days. That was like your 100-day, almost your 100-day, right? 85 days. It comes right back. As soon as you get the cues, it comes right back.
No, but I'm saying like for a whole year, or a couple of years, if somebody says what could happen?
Oh well, I think we get pretty weak after a year of no light. Yeah. That's, I think, the major loss. It's our internal rhythms will continue, but they won't be as strong, they won't be as sharp, and that longevity that we looked at, you'll still be getting a reasonable amount of sleep. And it'll be shifting, but it'll be shifting regularly. So I don't think I don't think you're going to be losing any less life because of those two features. But we don't know what it means when we don't get sunlight for a year or 2 years.
What about in a dzogchen tradition, there are something called 6 lamps, for example. We have something called 6 lamps. It's more like a universal light of the universe, and the light in your heart, light through heart through channels to the eye to the vision outside. They already talk about these 6 lights or 6 lamps, and there is a clearly association to outer light. So they would practice with the sunlight, for example. They would practice morning light. And evening light. During the midday, they will not practice. So these are called practice of the light. So do you think so first, I think there is this sense of integration of outer and inner light. That's what in the teaching they would call it integration of 3 spaces or 3 lights or something like that. So the light, ultimate sense of light, is referred to the internal light, the awareness, light of awareness.
Right.
So do you think since you are following teaching, practicing, do you think there's any connection with the solar light or internal master clock with the light of awareness, for example?
Hmm. That's a juicy question. Yes. Well, we know about the pineal gland, and the pineal gland, people say, connect to the third eye. And the pineal gland is what the SCN takes the light information through to, and it connects. So, I can't speak to that from a spiritual point of view, but I think the ancients knew a heck of a lot more than we even know now. We're just confirming so much of what was known. So in that respect, I think the physical basis is there for connecting an inner light. And then and the heart connects to the SCN, directly to the SCN via the vagus nerve. So maybe there is that, connections, or they all connect.
And the vagus nerve are connected, or?
Yeah, connects to the SCN, and then, which then connects to the pineal gland. So, and that connects to the heart. Yeah, and in fact, there are, and a lot of the recent heart math data and all of that, looking at heart rate variability and all, say that there are stronger signals from the heart to the brain than the reverse. So that the heart is actually stimulating the brain more than the brain is telling the heart what to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
So
I know, like, you use Whoop also. So have you seen sometime the data? Like, I have a couple of times experiences where when my recovery was very, very good, but my respiratory rate was much higher, or somehow has an alert sign saying, "Oh, elevated."
Yeah.
So usually I would have the lowest around 12, 9, something around 13, basically average 13 per minute. So when I have a very good recovery, it will go up to a 15 or something like that. I don't know why when you have a good recovery, your breath cycle goes higher. I don't know if you have noticed that.
Well, actually, I did see it once or twice. I've only been using it since the spring now, but I'm getting more data from it. The first thought that comes is that maybe increased oxygen flow, increased oxygenation, because you're breathing more. I mean, there's a certain limit to that. If you breathe too rapidly, you're going to retain CO2 and you're not going to get the oxygen. But if you increase your rate slowly, then it may very well oxygenate your tissues better.
Okay, so you're basically saying you're breathing more, getting more oxygen, so that's why your recovery is better, or recovery is better because if you're getting more oxygen, therefore you're breathing more.
Yeah, and I mean, chicken or egg, hard to say which is which, but it's probably, they're both working off each other, saying, hey, you know what, we need a little more oxygen, let's breathe a little faster, and you can do it now because you've slept well or whatever, so you can do more.
Wonderful. So one another thing I was curious about that you also mentioned earlier, in 2017, the first time these 3 Nobel Prize winners who is it a discovery of
the clock genes? Yeah.
Gene? So yeah. What about before that? It was not discussed or not talked. I'm very curious about it. Very late.
Well, yeah, very late, but we knew about the circadian rhythm and melatonin and light in general because of those cave studies I talked about. They were done like in the 60s. So we knew about that, but we didn't know what that mechanism at the cellular level was. That was what was, and you can't do those kinds of studies in humans because people don't like it when you cut them up. So they did that in mice, and Drosophila. Drosophila is the fruit fly, and fruit flies have multiple generations in very short times, so they could actually look at gene turnover and all that. And I think it was one of the, I'm not sure if there were a couple of serendipitous type findings. And I know one of them actually Sachin Panda talks about it in his book, the fact that every cell has clock genes. When he cut up the different parts, the legs, the whiskers, the arm, whatever, of the Drosophila, and he came back from vacation a week later and found they were given fluorescent genes connected to the clock genes, and when they turned on, you would see where they would fluoresce. Well, each of the individual parts of the fly were still fluorescing. They were turning on, which said, "Oh wow, there must be clock genes in each part of the body," and that's when they discovered that. I think it may have been something similar with the clock genes in the Drosophila. I think they took them. The ones who, I don't know how they measured sleep or, inactivity and activity, and the ones who were most active the shortest time and the longest time, and they kept rebreeding them until they were almost two distinct species. And then they looked at the genes in these and the genes in these, and they said, oh, these are what are different and something like that. But, yeah.
Yeah. So what about if there's a clock beyond the master clock in the brain and beyond the solar clock, something that controls both?
Yeah, I'd say spirit or the sun. Yeah, who knows? But actually, I have a quick question for you about, you said the Dzogchen masters would do their practices in morning sun and some different practices in evening sun. What were the major differences? Yeah.
So basically, I think as far as my understanding is concerned, it's not very much the way we have been talking about the circadian rhythm, sleep, and the health, and nothing like that. It's more like our own, even when I say our own, what does that mean? Our own means there's a sense of identity. You have your identity, I have my identity, we have collective, we are sharing something, common conversation about circadian rhythm, which is also pretty new topics and so on. So something everybody needed to experience their inner world, their inner imprints. So when you look at the mirror, you're able to see your face. You needed to see somewhere where it reflects. So the sunlight was somehow way of experiencing some deeper self, vision. So that's why the morning and afternoon, morning and evening, the sunrise and sunset are where you're supposed to, not in the midday, is not recommended.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then also, not only during the sun, but the interesting thing is that not only solar, but also dark. So you basically, you're practicing your inner vision, or you're practicing your inner light in the darkness by going into the dark room, or you're practicing your inner light by exposing yourself to sunrise and sunset, solar, with the help of solar system.
Yeah.
So that's how it's been done. Interesting.
That makes sense. Yeah. The dark. Look, the dark to me is just as important as the light. It's the part of the whole picture. We have to have both, and we don't experience the light without the dark, and that enables us to sort of not only see the difference, but to see in the dark differently. I don't like going out with a flashlight. I like to see the dark, and you can. There's enough. There's enough, but all the edges are muted, and it becomes easier to see space. Maybe. Yeah.
Any last advices or to people, anybody who's curious about, how to sleep longer, better quality?
Yeah. The whole talk. Get up in the morning at the same time every day, give or take, pretty close to that. Get out as soon as you get up in the sunlight. Have your breakfast pretty soon, and keep regular. Regular.
So regularity is more important than even the length you said.
Yeah.
Amount of time. Yeah. I definitely find it's a very, for example, what would be regularity would mean? I mean, within an hour, within a half an hour?
Definitely within an hour and closer to a half an hour. Okay. Closer to half an hour. Because once you go an hour later, even in sleep, you begin getting into a deeper level of sleep, and then that makes it more. That's why you don't feel as good when you fall back to sleep and you get up the second time. You're like, oh, why did I go back to sleep? So you really want to get regular within a half an hour, I'd say. And that's probably.
Yeah. So the problem with the modern society, it's not. I mean, not only the daylight saving, not only jet lag. But the really problem is where people do not have a regularity. During the week, they have one. When they have more deadline of work, they have another schedule. In the weekend, they have a party schedule. So they really, I mean, within a 1 week, 7 days, I don't know. Is there any number that people, how many, they don't really sleep, most of the people, right? It's like for sure, a couple of hour differences every week.
Yeah, and it could be a double whammy because they cut down their sleep so much during the week by having irregular and staying up late on several nights, and then they try to make it up on the weekend. They make up some, but they don't make all of it, so they're getting less sleep overall, and it's irregular. So like that's like shooting yourself in both feet at the same time. It's really so. I would say if you can't make your sleep during the week, to make it up on the weekend, but make it up during a nap in midday, because that allows you to keep your regular sleep schedule. A nap is sort of an additional make-up sleep time during the middle of the day when you're not messing with your circadian clock, so you're keeping that regular, much more beneficial. And if you were going to sleep in 2 hours, well, just take that 2 hours instead of sleeping in, get up and do stuff, and then build it into the afternoon. It's the same 2 hours, only it's much more beneficial, much more helpful.
Well, thank you so much. As always, wonderful to have you. And I will be in touch. Let's keep on talking. Danny, I've been telling him also. So I think this is the topic that clearly I've been very, very engaged and learning a lot about it, and also really trying to working on it myself also. Even during the teachings, I've been talking a lot about it. So this is the topic will stay the rest of my life with me. So I appreciate. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, my pleasure, and thank you for making this important, because it really is. It really is. All right. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the CyberSangha podcast. If you'd like to learn more about CyberSangha, visit us online at cybersangha.net.